Hello, I'm Kads, and welcome to today's video. As promised, this is the follow-up to my Raid Starter Pack episode on the Hydra Clan boss and progressing through hard and beyond. And we're going to be showcasing my current Hydra teams, at least in the year 2024, because I don't anticipate them changing for some time. Now, I'm not going to make you guys watch a run or anything. Unless you want to see that, let me know in the comment section down below. Maybe that could be arranged in a future iteration. But in this case, you can see that we've already used all three of our Hydra keys. So I'm just going to talk about each of my three teams, and I do run Nightmare, Brutal, and Hard. And I'll also highlight what I think could be improvements to be made on each team, because I don't think any of them are perfect by any means, and probably we can get some more damage out of them with a little bit more optimization and or some good luck. As usual, I will start this off by issuing a handful of disclaimers. First of all, being that I am in the end game, and so that is primarily what allows me to do the highest difficulty of Hydra to varying degrees of success. I am also free to play, and so there is some just good fortune with some decent Hydra champions in the mix there. So you may or may not have all the champions that I have access to, and this is not meant to be a guide as far as how to build a team. For that, you could check out the Raid Starter Pack episode I did on the Hydra Clan boss. You can check that out in the card up above. And lastly, I run what I like to call a semi-auto style, where generally speaking, the team is just running on auto, but I am clicking to target heads when it's strategic to do so, and or decapitated heads as well sometimes. And I always used revivers on my teams, because although you can get away with not using a reviver if your team is robust enough, there's always a chance you could kill, or one of your DPS can kill themselves on reflect damage, or you can just get a bad RNG run where Head of Wrath goes ham and starts wiping people. So I always like the fail-safe of having a reviver, regardless of what some of the talking heads might say, but that's just my personal preference. So I always regard that as integral to my teams. So let's start from the top with Nightmare. You can see right now I'm third in my clan, so pretty decent amount of damage, 225 million. We are most certainly not a whale clan, so do not expect to see any Trunda reset shenanigans going on. We just have pretty much normal teams for those who are capable of doing Nightmare and or the harder difficulty. So just keep that in mind in case you're spying on anyone else's teams that you might see as I scroll through here. But focusing in on my team here, we have my Nightmare Hydra team, and it's comprised of Nekmo, Tuhanarak, Pythion, Michinaki, Wallmaster Othorion, and a Husk. So in terms of the damage output, I would say the 225 million is a pretty decent key. It's probably more on the higher side of a run. I did get pretty good RNG, although I will note that this is not hitting the turn limit cap. I've not managed to do that on any of the difficulties we're going to cover today, but again, that's one of the reasons we could get improvement going forward, so depending on what happens. And you can see the damage breakdown here. We have Nekmo just getting a lot of AoEs, and therefore he gets a decent amount of damage. Tuhanarak doing a little bit. Probably this is an amalgamation of all the Warmaster hits, particularly on decapitated heads. Python getting a few hits here and there. He does not have Warmaster notably. Michinaki, one of the primary DPSs, but also getting credit for the hex that he applies. Wallmaster Othorion, as you might expect, enemy max HP, going to be doing the bulk of the damage. Then Husk, another enemy max HP champion, doing about 2/3 of what Wallmaster Othorion can do. And I'll make sure to go over the builds at the end of the video, but you can kind of see the gear sets that everyone's in from this page here. So Nekmo is notably in a Provoke set, so he's one of our Provoke champions. I guess backup Husk is kind of the primary one. Tuhanarak is in triple perception, Pythion is in regen, Michinaki is in double perception and crit damage, Wallmaster Othorion is in a smattering of gear, but double perception, 2-piece stone skin, and then a supersonic, I think amulet or something like that, or ring, I forget which one. We'll take a look at it later. And then Husk is there in relentless and perception. So in terms of breaking down how this team composition came together, I'll once again bring up the Hydra hierarchy, which will be linked in the description box down below if you want to check it out for yourself and kind of just understand that. But I do explain that more in detail in the video focusing on the Hydra, again linked in the card up above if you want to check it out. But we're going to be focusing on the lower section here, where we have a breakdown of each of the three teams, focusing on how they're utilizing the elements of the hierarchy. And just for those who don't know, green just means it's a higher priority thing, and then blue means it's a nice to have. So I have the teams laid out in the same order you'll see them on the attacking screen there. And we have Nekmo in the lead position, of course, because he does have the speed aura. But in terms of his overall kit, what he's bringing to the table, we have increased speed, increased turn meter, and an extra turn on the A3. We have AoE decreased speed and leech on the A2, and then AoE decreased attack on the A1. So he's always doing AoEs, which makes him really strong and synergistic with a Provoke set, but it could also be Curse set. He could also be in a Relentless set. Depends on what you need on your particular composition. But in my case, Provoke was the way to go because of the aforementioned AoEs. Tuhanarak is coming in there with the increased defense and increased speed, speed on the A3. She has decreased attack and block buffs. Granted, it's single target, but it has the ability to debuff spread. So sometimes it helps. Sometimes it spreads HP burn to a head with poison cloud. Sometimes it spreads nothing useful. It's kind of a crapshoot. And that was one of the pitfalls of the previous iteration of this particular composition. Decreased speed on the A1, as well as providing continuous heals on the A1 on herself, and then someone with the lowest HP, which can also be herself. And then the big kahuna is that her passive is able to cleanse a random debuff off of all allies, which majority of the case, or majority of the time, is going to be the true fears whenever the Head of Torment is out. So that is why she's doing a lot on this team. We have Pythion up next. Primary thing, he brings revival on the A3, as we talked about. I do like having revivers on every single one of my squads. There's a potential to put strengthen out there if we happen to use the revive, but in most cases, no one actually dies in this run just because this is a super resilient team by comparison. He has healing on his A2 and the A3 and on the A1. So healing through he heals more when there's a bunch of debuffs out there. So he's actually really good against the Head of Blight, because if he poisons everyone, we get a pretty massive heal if we get the cleanse right afterward. So the cleanse, block debuffs, of course, can prevent any of the other things that the heads might throw out there. Provokes, decreased attack, the weakens, etc. So really resilient as far as preventing all of those debuffs from landing. And then, of course, it also sets us up nicely for Tuhanarak's passive to also cleanse only the true fears, because we have block debuffs up majority of the time in the rest of the cases. Michinaki up next. AoE buff strip on the A3, as well as being able to apply Hex. On the A2, applying AoE decreased defense, as well as potential to apply decreased attack AoE if there's Hex out there. HP burn on the A1, which is kind of effectively AoE, because if you have Hex out there, his passive has a 50-50 shot for that he'll join in on an attack or the ally attack here, and then he has a chance to place HP burn on the A1. So over the course of a longer battle, he can effectively have HP burn on multiple heads, depending on who you're targeting. Wellmaster Othorion is, of course, next. He does have an extra turn on the A3, puts a bunch of buffs on himself, but they're not AoE, so I didn't list them in this hierarchy here. Block buffs and decreased attack on the A2. Of course, this is also an enemy max HP double hitter, so super strong. So really good kit overall. Lots of turn meter as well when enemies are alive on the A1 and the A2, and then he also makes himself tankier when he kills enemies with the passive, including decapitating heads. So super strong. You can build him for a lot of damage, and he just gets tankier over the course of a longer battle. And lastly, we have Husk, enemy max HP, but also on the A2. We turn off the A3, don't really need it, and then provoke on the A1, and again, he get the extra turns because he's in Relentless. So once again, calling attention to the fact that I said I run my teams semi-auto, I definitely make sure to always target the Head of Decay when it's up and not provoked. Otherwise, I kind of let them target whoever they want, because generally speaking, they're going to target positive affinity matchups and thus be able to deal more damage and deal less weak hits. Obviously, for the AoE enemy max HP hits, doesn't really matter who they attack because it's an AoE and stuff like that. But like I said, I do want to make sure that we are locking down the Head of Decay, because that is my least favorite head and the one you have to control the most. So if either Husk or Nekmo places a provoke, then again, I take off the little circle under the Head of Decay, and again, let them freely attack whoever they want to. And as soon as that provoke, or as soon as that Head of Decay takes a turn, I target him again until we can get the provoke back on top of him. And if he's not alive, then I just let them have free reign. And then, of course, I'll also target the head who consumed people, but that's less of a concern just because we have a double enemy max HP DPS going on here in this particular composition. So in terms of improvements that could be made to this team, I think everyone's gear is exactly what they need, or it's good enough for what they need as far as this composition is concerned. So there's not much to change there. So it's really just about champions and then area bonuses, which we'll talk a little bit about at least once in this video, because it's going to be the same and apply to all of the difficulties. But if I had the best RNG in the world, then I would most certainly replace Pythion with an Elva Autumnborn, who I don't have, but she essentially kind of brings the same thing of the cleanse and the block debuffs. The increased speed she brings is redundant because we have that from Nekmo and Tuhanarak, so that's not as important, but it is nice. But more importantly, she also has she has another revival as well, that's important. But when she ends her turn, she puts Perfect Veil on whoever is the lowest person, which typically on this team is probably going to be Husk. And so we would just have another backup way to prevent us from getting the true fear on whoever is the most vulnerable at that moment. So that's pretty handy. In addition, her passive also just heals everyone every time they take a turn, kind of like a Siphi or like Syl the Drakes type passive. And so that would just be extra healing, because Pythion does a little bit when he takes his turn to heal with the A1 or the A2, but Elva would just kind of AoE heal everyone, so just kind of keep everyone topped up when they're not healing from the leech. And then if we were super lucky, then we'd upgrade our Husk into like a Grazor Iron Guts, where we keep the enemy max HP hits from his A2. We get the buff extension, which would probably keep, or which would definitely keep block debuffs up the entire time, as well as all the other buffs that we get across the board. It would help mischief tanking from Wallmaster Othorion and or Tuhanarak. I didn't mention that, of course. That's why they have Lightning Cage on both of them, because they have the most buffs on the team. So I want the head of mischief to target both of them. You'll see that again when we talk about the builds. But with Grisur, we'd be able to maintain the provoke as far as cycling through it. It's not on the A1, but it is on an ability, and we cycle through enough turns on this team that we most certainly will lap the head of decay. And then again, in the meantime, you have Nekmo on the provoke set, kind of being the backup provoke, while Grisur would be the primary one. So it would just be an upgrade. We'd maintain the provoke, we maintain the enemy max HP, potentially with a higher multiplier, and then we also get the benefit, I think, of increased resistance. So we're just less likely, or I guess it makes the job of mischief tanking that much easier. And then also we might take less poisons from like the head of blight, stuff like that. And so it could all just synergistically work very, very well as an upgrade to this composition. And then if we pop over to the Great Hall area bonuses for Hydra specifically, you can see that there is tons of room to grow here. I index primarily into resistance just because I wanted it to be easier for my mischief tanks to actually mischief tank, just because even getting the thresholds that are recommended on Hell Hades and other websites, you kind of have that like 5% chance for something to happen. So getting an extra 80 pushes it that much closer to the 3% chance, which can still obviously happen regardless of what your resistance is, but it just makes me not have to index 600 resistance onto all my champions so that they can, have the highest chance of being able to resist everything. You can see I put some effort into accuracy just to make it easier for people to get the accuracy requirements, just because Nightmare is very, very stat intensive. I indexed a little bit into crit damages for the enemy max HP hitters so they can get closer to hitting the cap, especially when there's decreased defense and or weaken out there. A little bit of speed, and I'm just kind of starting off with the ignore defense, and that's probably where I'm going to try and max it next, just to get that damage, as we'll talk about later on for the hard team, where this will come into play a lot more. And probably eventually I will index into defense and attack for the same thing, just to increase the stats and damage output, specifically on the hard comp, as we'll get there later. Next up, we have my brutal team, which I did already showcase in my previous Hydra video, but nonetheless, we're going to go over it again in this one, just to talk a little bit more in detail about how this composition works and how it came together. So starting off with the overall damage output, 217 million on this run, which again is more on the high side, or I guess maybe it's not the highest I've seen, but it's closer to the high side, a good RNG run. And once again, just like Nightmare, we're not quite hitting the turn limit. It's getting close. I think, well, I see like the 1,000 turn mark, and then I stopped really paying attention, but I think this team was somewhere around 1,300-ish turns. So there's still some room to grow to hit the turn limit, and then, then we'd actually cap out on the damage potential for this composition. So in terms of the damage distribution, you can see here Eostrid Dreamsong dropping close to 50 million. That's most certainly a lot of damage from the Hex, from the curse set, which you can see on her, but also the Brimstone. She does have 5-star Awaken. I did grind for that soul from the Hero's Path. So Brimstone procs, as well as she's also built for damages we'll see in her build later on. As far as DPS is concerned, Michinaki number 2 doing work here, 86 million, again benefiting a little bit from the Hex, but also just from overall damage that he puts out. And then Inquisitor Shamael, tertiary DPS, doing about 42 million. And then you have the 3 supports who primarily get a bunch of damage from War Master procs and just having AoEs on their abilities. Kantra has a triple hitter AoE, great for Giant Slayer. Uggo has the block buff, Decreased defense, big AoE, which gets War Master, and then Mighty Ukko has an AoE on the A1 and the A2. In terms of the builds, we already talked about the curse set on Eostrid Dreamsong, which is very, very strong on her. We have a provoke set on Mighty Ukko, so again, kind of the same thing as Nekmo Thor on the Nightmare team, where we just have AoE on both of our active abilities, and so we have a chance to provoke as kind of a backup. Uggo is in Relentless with nothing else. Kantra is also in Relentless. Michinaki is in 4-piece Merciless and then Perception, so he has a little bit of a chance to get the reflex effect when he does damage, which he most certainly does a lot of damage. And then Inquisitor Shamael is in 2-piece Stone Skin, 2-piece Supersonic, and then 2-piece Cruel, so quite interesting build on him. So in terms of the hierarchy relative to the Brutal team, we have Eostrid Dreamsong in the lead, not because she has a useful aura, but just because Inquisitor Shamael is on the team and he feeds turn meter to the lead, and we want her to get as many turns as possible because she does have turn meter fill boosting abilities, and as well as the AoE heal with her passive, and so we can just get her to cycle through more turns, which also keeps Hex out there more often and just keeps the team running as fast as possible. But she does bring increased attack, AoE increased speed, as well as an extra turn on the A3, which transforms nicely into decreased speed and weaken on the A2, and then her passive provides the healing, and the curse set provides the Hex. Ukko provides a revive, which I most certainly do use if people start to, or if anyone dies on the team. I turn this ability off when it's running on auto, but I will pause the run or take it off auto if someone dies, and then make sure that I revive him manually, or revive people manually. So that is where that comes into play. A little bit of inefficiency, but nonetheless it does work for the team. Increase speed whenever I do that, but usually he does not use that ability because it is turned off. Buff strip, which is really handy for in case any buffs or any champions are not, or any Hydra heads are not under block buffs, but he does also bring block buffs in and of himself. But he has a weakness of not being able to place it when heads respawn, because they do have that protection buff thing that makes them take less damage, and so he can't ever place it on newly spawned heads. Uggo can, she's fine, but they kind of work together to a degree over the course of the long haul, where if anything happens, or if anything squeezes past Uggo, then Ukko has a chance to strip it off. And then also, decrease accuracy is kind of growing on me as far as a really handy debuff, just because it makes it easier for the mischief tanks to mischief tank. We take less poison from the head of blight, and they just, the heads just have less accuracy, which just makes it a lot more doable. Less provokes from the head of wrath and stuff like that. So it's just really nice to have if you can squeeze it onto your teams. Decrease attack AoE on the A1. We already talked about the provoke set, same thing with the AoE on both of its abilities. And then every once in a while his passive can steal buffs, which I don't really depend on, but sometimes it's nice. It'll steal increase attack from the head of wrath or something like that, so which can be pretty clutch. Uggo comes in there, has a heal on the A3 as well as a cleanse. It's technically a break in case of emergency revive, but it's very, very rare that she's the last person alive, because if that happens, a lot of things have gone wrong and the run is probably over. Block buffs, her bread and butter ability, and decreased defense, really strong, and then the leech on the A1. And then I forgot to update it because I did change her into Relentless fairly recently, a couple weeks ago, so we also have the extra turns for the Relentless set. And I opted to go for Relentless because Reflex is pretty nice, but I'm not hitting the turn limit yet, so I have room to still run Relentless on most of my champions, or if I can, and so that's why I opted to put her in that. But also it just helps her cycle a bit quicker through her abilities, and thus we can maintain block buffs up more easily. Contra the Cyclone, primarily there as our primary provoker. As long as there's 5 debuffs out there on the head of decay, there's a 75% chance that you'll land the provoke just by taking a turn. That's part of the reason why she's in Relentless, because if there's a bunch of debuffs out there, especially on, or specifically on the head of decay, and she misses it, but she can get a Relentless proc, and then she gets an extra turn, she has another chance, a 75% chance to land the provoke. So that's why I went for Relentless on her as well. She has a smattering of debuffs that she can land on her A3 triple hitter, but I don't really depend on those. They're kind of nice to have. We get a weaken out there sometimes, we get decreased speed, decreased attack, whatever. Heal reduction is useless, but sometimes it's just nice to have extra debuffs out there, but everything she's providing is covered by some of the other champions on the squad, so it's just kind of a bonus whenever she gets the hits. Also, again, the Giant Slayer procs are handy for damage overall. Inquisitor Shamael is our solution to the Head of Torment, so we're never susceptible to any of the true fears, and again, we're feeding turn meter to the lead champion, which gives us a bunch of turn meter, as well as helps the team keep running. He technically does have the ability to decrease the debuff or buff duration when he's counterattack or using the A1 at all, or counterattacking when he get debuffs landed on us, but he doesn't have accuracy, so that never really happens. But nonetheless, it is in his kit if you wanted to build him for high resistance and high accuracy. And then we have Michinaki number 2, which is basically the same as above, but with the addition of the decreased cooldowns ability, because he is again built in Merciless. So for this team, as far as improvements are concerned, the primary one, and you guys might know if you watch my videos why I keep mentioning her in Shard Pull videos as someone desirable, but that is Molly Tankard for Contra the Cyclone, because there's many times where Contra just lets me down. Unfortunately, she'll take 3 turns, 4 turns in a row and not place a single provoke on the head of decay. So adding in Molly as a replacement would get us the chance to get 2 turn provokes, which is really solid, especially because if you start to lap the head of decay and you reuse the ability and the head has taken 1 turn, you can still place a 2 turn provoke on top of a 1 turn provoke. So it's super solid. But also Molly's passive, where we just get extra turn meter, which synergize really well with Eostrid already boosting turn meter, and then Inquisitor Shamael boosting turn meter as well. So we would just kind of skyrocket ahead, or start lapping the heads even more so, just with the passive from Molly Tankard. HP burn on the A1 as well. We only have HP burn just from Michinaki, and then the Hex when his passive procs, so it would just be another source as far as getting that off. And then most importantly, Molly could also be a mischief tank, because she does place reflect damage on herself, which is unique across this composition, so it would just be that much easier to focus the Head of Mischief on top of having the decreased accuracy from Mighty Ukko. And as I mentioned before, pretty much every debuff that's useful that Kantra places on her A2 is covered by someone else on the team. So it's not mandatory that she has to place them on her A3. It's primarily just to get the damage and place more debuffs in case there's none out there in order to activate her passive. And so she could easily be swapped out 1-to-1 with Molly Tankard. And then also that would alleviate me having to stop the run in order to make sure that we can revive with Mighty Ukko, and because Molly also brings a revive. So super solid 1-to-1 swap, and she would be a huge improvement for this team. And then of course, anything and everything we already talked about with the area bonuses would apply to this team. More damage, more survivability, etc. All of that would help bring this team closer to hitting the turn limit. And lastly, we have the hard team, which most certainly is not as powerful as it could be. It needs a lot of work, a lot of room for improvement, but nonetheless, I think we can make this a really, really super fun team that mimics what some of the super whales can kind of do with their crazy compositions. But as it stands right now, this is the current iteration of the team with a whopping, or perhaps disappointing, 152 million damage, so less than Nightmare and less than Brutal, which is surprising, but nonetheless, we'll understand that when we talk about the shortfalls of this particular composition as it is right now. But we do have Nekmo Thar number 2 in there. You can see I have a lot of convenient duplicates as a common theme for my Hydra teams. We have Nekmo Thar again, Nekmo Thar 2, who is in a provoke set once again. So all 3 of my like Hydra specific AoE A1 champions are all in provoke sets, just because they can back up whoever the primary provoker is. We have Rector Drath in there in reflex and speed, just so she can cycle through her abilities, keep the veil up going. We have Wukong, who's my build for Arena, and he's built in Savage and Perception, so he's pretty much maxed out DPS. And then we have Michinaki number 3, 50 million damage there. I guess I didn't talk about the damage. We'll come back to that. But he's also in a Merciless set, 4-piece, and then a speed set, just to make sure that he goes ahead of all the damage there's on this team. We have Varl the Destroyer, a super fun Team Tower hard unlock champion who's in lethal and perception. So a good mix of enough accuracy to do the job, as well as providing a significant amount of damage, but not quite enough for it to satisfy where I want him to be. And then Harima, one of my crown jewels on my account, provoking, but also tons of damage, so nearly 50 mil there as well. And she is in lethal and killstroke, which is different than she's been in previous, so we'll definitely highlight that when we get to the champion builds. So right out of the gate, this is one of the limitations of being, just a normal player free to play, means you can't instantly max out everyone all the time. And so Varl right now is at level 52, which is a marker for me on my account that they have no masteries at the moment, so he does not yet have Helm Smasher in order to really maximize his damage. So that's one thing that we're definitely missing. Michinaki, you can tell he's in the process of getting masteries, but we don't yet have War Master on him, so his damage could be, or will be, substantially higher once we get that going. And then in terms of the overall damage here, 152 million, the breakdown, Harima is doing the bulk of it because of her defense scaling abilities, but also just being able to deal damage based on defense, so she's super tanky at the same time, and dealing a significant amount of damage. Michinaki, once again, benefiting from the Hex, and so he's getting a lot of credit there, so kind of matching her 1-to-1 just overall, because he's getting credit for all the splash damage that all the other 2 DPSs do. We have Sun Wukong dropping 20 million, which is pretty decent, and we have Varl dropping 20 million, which is underwhelming, but again, he does not yet have Helm Smasher, as opposed to Harima and Wukong, who do currently have Helm Smasher. And then we have a reasonable, just under 10 million for Nekmo Thar, again with the AoE on all of his abilities. He's just stacking up War Master hits over the course of a longer battle. And then Rector dropping 1 million, which is just from her random A1s that I guess primarily on decapitated heads, where it might do a little bit of damage, but it's nothing substantial. So same thing, we can take a look at the hierarchy here, which is a lot smaller, or at least a lot less populated than the other ones, but this is what happens when you're kind of condensing your best champions into the higher difficulties, and thus you're using the leftovers, so to speak, air quotes, to deal with the rest of the difficulties. So for this team, Nekmo Thar is exactly the same. He's in a similar build. He's not as fast or accurate, just because this is hard versus Nightmare, so he doesn't need as much accuracy, but same capabilities as Nekmo Thar 1, especially with the provoke set on him as well. Rector Drath in there because of the veil, so she's protecting us from the Head of Torment as much as she can, but also healing and revival. Again, I like revivers on all of my teams. We have Sun Wukong in there, which is our primary block buffs champion, but also he has the chance to steal buffs, which is kind of handy. But and then of course, one of the 4 DPSs on this team, so he did a decent amount. But spoiler alert, he's going to be replaced. Michinaki 3, basically the same as the one above. He's also in a 4-piece Merciless simplest set, so we're getting the same benefit as the one on the Brutal team. Harima is in there, again, one of the primary DPS, if not the primary DPS, provoke as well to control the Head of Decay whenever she gets it off, and then decrease attack when she uses her A1, which is pretty clutch in a lot of situations. And then we have Varl, who is providing AoE weaken, so we have decreased defense from Michinaki and then weaken from Varl, so we both have the combination of decreased defense and weaken for the most case overall, and then another form of decreased attack. But the one thing to note here that we are most certainly missing from this composition is that we have no form of increased attack or increased defense, and so that is heavily limiting the amount of damage that all of these champions can do. So Michinaki 1 on the Nightmare team, he has Tuhanarak providing increased defense, so his damage is maximized, so to speak. And on team 2, we have Inquisitor Shamael benefiting from the increased attack from Eostrid Dreamsong, and so he's getting his damage kind of maximized there. Michinaki is just kind of running free on that team. There's no increased defense, unfortunately, but nonetheless, he gets a lot of credit for the Hex, and that's just kind of enough in the situation. But here we don't have either. We don't increase attack or increase defense, which is most certainly leaving some damage on the table. And so the first change I'm actually going to make is we're going to sacrifice Wukong. Even though he's doing a substantial and appreciable amount of damage, the 20 million here, we are going to drop his slot for actually Archbishop Pinthroy, who's going to take this role. I'm going to build him in a reflex set. He's going to be kind of, or ideally, our mischief tank, but I don't think he's going to have any unique buffs, but I might run Lightning Cage on him just to make sure that he has a unique buff on him. So we'll kind of see how that progresses. But we'd maintain the capability of the block buffs, even though it's not a buff steal, which is kind of handy in some situations, but he'd be taking the same spot, Spirit Affinity, replacing the block buffs, which unfortunately is not the strongest affinity because there are a lot of magic heads and a lot of the rotations of Hydra, on top of now also having the chance to weak it as compared to Wukong, who just places it on his ability. But one of the main things that we get for making that swap is that Archbishop Pinthroy on the A3 has increased defense and a shield and a heal. So he can back up Rector Wrath by healing everyone else, providing a shield that just prevents us from taking more damage, but also that makes sure, or that helps ensure that when Rector Wrath uses her heal, she actually brings people to full HP, thus giving us the perfect veil, because if she's healing someone and they don't get the full HP, you get continuous heal instead of the perfect veil, which doesn't really help against the Head of Torment. So we'd be getting a lot of things by making that swap. We'd maintain block buffs for the most part. We're adding in increased defense, which will really supercharge Michinaki and Harima's damage output, and hopefully that should be able to offset the damage we lose by dropping Wukong from the composition. And then we're getting additional heals and shielding just to protect the team in order to allow Rector Wrath to actually place perfect veil more often when she's healing the team when it's her turn. So as I mentioned, Archbishop Pinthroy will be swapped in because I do actually have him, but if I was, reaching into the ether of RNG and we got some good luck, then if I got a Duchess, actually, she would probably replace Rector Wrath. I'd probably try to get her into some cool reflex gear as well, because I'd primarily use her for Hydra, but she might double as a utility in arena and stuff like that, because obviously she's really cracked for that purpose. But that would give us perfect veil as well on a 4-turn cooldown AoE, but also not having to attack, and it's not conditional based on healing. It just places it, so it's just more reliable innately. We would maintain the revival capability. We'd take less damage from all of the AoE attacks just because of her passive. And then most importantly, we would add block debuffs to this composition, because right now we're susceptible to the Head of Wrath placing decreased attack, which most certainly neuters Wukong's and Varl's damage output just because they're just dealing half damage. So if we happen to get lucky and we're able to put Duchess in the slot and then add in Archbishop Pinthroy, then we would have increased attack, increased defense, we'd have block buffs, we'd maintain the perfect veil, we still have revives, we have block buffs now, we have increased defense, we have the shield, we have the healing, and so it would just be a super robust team. You add in all the area bonuses that we already talked about, and then this team would definitely shoot up to maybe 300, dare I say 400 million damage, depending on what we can get out of the team. So here you have all three of those teams summarized in the Hydra Clash format, and you can see that Nightmare is most certainly carrying most of my damage, Brutal is a close second, and Hard is a distant third, with lots of room for improvement. And so probably, at least on the current system of the current point system Hydra Clash, I would expect Hard to start to drift into beating out Brutal once we get it fully optimized going forward. But nonetheless, I'm pretty happy with the way things are right now, and once I make the quick swap into Archbishop Pinthroy, I'm not really going to be changing teams for a while unless we get one of the improvement champions that I already highlighted. And you can see, yeah, we're carrying the clan. Look at me, 1.85 billion damage in terms of Hydra Clash credit. So decent amount of teams considering, still being end game, but definitely being free to play. And so we just happen to get lucky with triple Michinaki, for example, double Nekmo Thar. But a lot of the champions you see here are, you know, epics, somewhat accessible epics, and or fusion champions like Pythion here, Eostrid Dream Song, Wukong, Varl is free. And so there's a mix of, you know, luck as, you know, from some of the champions and ones you could just earn. So it's a good mix, and I'm really happy with where my teams are, at least in the current state of things. So now it's everyone's favorite part of the video where we go through the builds on the champions. And, you know, this is just for transparency that you understand, you know, these builds aren't necessarily crazy or anything. They might be achievable. They might not be achievable. It depends on your level of gear and quality of gear. So feel free to skip around to the champion whose build you'd like to see highlighted the most, but they will be in no particular order because we're just going to find them as we go along through the champion collection here. So starting off at the top here is Eostrid Dream Song, who is in, like I mentioned, a curse set, and then she does have one piece of Merciless. It's not intentional to get the, you know, damage out of it, but nonetheless it's just kind of a bonus on the attack. It just happened to be a good offset piece to finish out her build. So she is built fairly tanky, but also built for damage because she has surprisingly decent multipliers. So her attack's not super high, but nonetheless you can see that she does a decent chunk of damage on top of the hex damage that we get credit for. 63,000 on the HP, 3,500-ish on the attack, 3,450, let's round down. 3,000 on the defense, 258 on the speed, full crit rate, 191 on the crit damage, nothing crazy, but nonetheless it adds up over time, and then 435 on the resistance. Now, of course, some of these stats are elevated by the area bonuses from Hydra, but when I'm building champions, I don't typically account for that unless it's absolutely necessary. So this is the way I build the champions, to be functional without the area bonuses, and I treat the bonuses as a bonus. For the blessing, we already highlighted, but she does have Brimstone on because it's just nice to have Brimstone at least on one champion on every single composition of Hydra, just because you just get credit whenever it goes off. But this is notably the protected variation, so even if it's on the Head of Decay and he does a cleanse, it doesn't matter, it cannot be removed, and so it will still stay on whichever head it's on, or it will activate whenever the Head of Decay does a cleanse if he happens to have it on. So pretty nice to have protected Brimstone on the team. And then for the masteries, we have a pretty standard debuffer set up with the offense tree hugging left hand side coming down to War Master, and the support tree a little bit different, kind of focusing on a little bit of the healing side of things because she does heal with the passive, but banking all the way back over to the right for Sniper and Master Hexer. We didn't really need all the accuracy because you can see that she's definitely overbuilt for Brutal. She has 435 accuracy and then some, and so she's more than capable of landing debuffs without having the extra accuracy from some of those stuffs on the right hand side. Next up, we have my Pythion PvE built in a regen set, and his total stats are as follows: 96,000, almost 100k. That's the goal, to get him to 100k eventually on the HP. Don't care about his attack. 3,500 on the defense, so very, very tanky. 254 on the speed, super quick, and then 560 on the resistance. So super high resistance build for PvE, but also do use him in PvP as necessary. Life Harvest is most certainly for the PvP side of things. So whenever people are revived, he gets some turn meter and also destroys their max HP, which definitely adds up over the course of a, I guess, shorter battle, however you want to think about the duration of arena battles, but it definitely adds up, and the turn meter can be clutch to, you know, get a revive off on my team, stuff like that, and so fairly useful. For the masteries, focusing on the defense and support tree, indexing on, you know, his support capabilities, coming down to Unshakable, boosting his resistance as high as possible, delay death and stuff like that to take less damage, just kind of the tanky defense masteries, and then all of the healing support masteries, notably Lasting Gifts, and then a Spirit Haste as well. Next up, we have Harima, who I did mention was fairly rebuilt into Lethal and Killstroke, I think, before she was in Perception and Savage, so upgraded to a degree, although right now her stats are a little bit worse than they were before, but that is due to Ascension, so I do need to farm some Sand Devil, get some more dust, and start to fix all of these gear pieces here. You can see the gloves in the chest. This is accuracy, I want defense. These are attack, and I want defense. This is HP, which isn't bad, but I probably want to go for speed. So a little showcase of some of the gear pieces there. But her total stats are as follows: 48,000 on the HP, 6.2k on the defense, 238 on the speed, full crit rate, 326 on the crit damage. That makes me feel so whale, man. And don't really care about the accuracy or resistance in her build. For the blessing, we do have Soul Reap on her. She is in an arena build, so this can be nice to finish people off, particularly when she uses her A3, the AoE, so you can get a lot of Soul Reap off if everyone's just a little sliver away from dying. And then masteries, as you'd expect, pretty much a nuker type build here. Shield Breaker, just because, well, I guess I picked that when Bolster was more of the meta. It's kind of being phased out a little bit with the advent of King Narcissus, but a lot of people still run a lot of shield champions, so deals more damage to anyone under a shield, particularly like a Duchess who puts up a shield every time, but ending on Helm Smasher, pretty standard offense tree. And then coming on the defense tree, definitely wanting to get Retribution if you can for the counterattacks, because that most certainly can kill a lot of people because he is stacked to the nines with defense and damage. Next up, we have Sun Wukong in a Savage set and Perception set, obviously built for the arena as a nuker as well. Total stats, 47,000 on the HP, 6k on the attack, 248 on the speed, so most certainly on the faster side for a nuker. Full crit rate, 262 on the crit damage, and then 322 on the accuracy. It's whatever I can kind of get just as a byproduct, but I most certainly did want to get him into Perception as an offset just to get the extra accuracy. As you might suspect, same logic as Harima, we do have Soul Reap on him, and yeah, just helps him finish people off if he happens to not kill them. But for the most part, you guys know how Wukong works with the A2. He definitely kills people majority of the time. And the masteries, similar to Harima, were kind of, well, I guess fairly different. Fairly different from Harima, but similar theme. We're focusing on the offense tree, getting a lot of the initial nuker type masteries, notably ending on Helm Smasher, of course, ignoring more defense. And then the support tree, a little bit of boost of some of the accuracy stuff, lower steel for boosted stats, and then Spirit Haste, because sometimes he's the last guy alive, and if everyone's dead, he goes a little bit faster. You get that A2 at the right time, and you just turn the entire fight on its head. Next up, Nekmo Thar, number 1 in the Provoke set on top of Perception set. So total stats here, 60,000 on the HP, 3,200 on the attack, although he's not built for damage, 3,800 almost on the defense, 253 on the speed, so fairly quick. And then accuracy, of course, this is for Nightmare, so we do want it on the higher side, 494 up there. For the Blessing, we did opt for Cruelty because he does have, again, a lot of AoEs in his kit. He's always doing AoEs, I guess, if you can account for the fact that the A3 is an extra turn. So Cruelty, stacking up as much defense reduction as possible whenever he takes turns is pretty handy. And then for the Masteries, pretty standard debuffer setup, hugging the left-hand side of the offense tree, notably ending on War Master for the damage, and then getting the nice split between Rapid Response and Arcane Celerity because he does both buffs and debuffs. Lower Steel, cycle of magic and a little chance to decrease the cooldown, and then of course ending on Sniper and Master Hexer. Next up, we have Tuhanarak in Triple Perception. She's one of the champions. I haven't changed her build in a long time, but she's one of the champions who's built in high resistance and high accuracy, and whenever I have to do that, Triple Perception is most certainly the way to go. So her total stats, 64,000 on the HP, 3,500 almost on the defense, 267 on the speed, so fairly quick, 446 on the resistance, and then 367 on the accuracy. So this is where you need to be if you want to have some sort of mischief tank for Nightmare level Hydra. You want about 450 resistance and at least 350 on the accuracy. So she's perfect in that way. And then, as I mentioned before, the Blessing, we have Lightning Cage on her just because it provides an extra buff whenever the heads respawn. That counts as a buff, so we get Lightning Arm stacks from that, although she uses it, or she'll burn them whenever it gets up to 3, but it'll respawn fairly consistently whenever heads respawn, and that just helps direct the Head of Mischief towards her. Again, she's high resistance, and so she has a chance, most of the time she won't have her buff stolen or her turn meter stolen, so it's pretty useful. And then for the Masteries, again, fairly standard debuff for Masteries, as you might see as a general trend as we go through these, but left-hand side of the offense tree coming down to War Master, kind of following a little bit of Nekmo Thar's approach, but we did want the extra HP and a little bit of healing from the continuous heals, but the Rapid Response and Arcane Celerity split, Lower Steel, Cycle of Magic, and then most importantly ending on Lasting Gifts and a Master Hexer to extend the duration of the buffs and the debuffs. Mighty Ukko, champion number 2 in the Provoke set and the Perception as well. Total stats here, 58,000 on the HP, 3,000 on the defense, 251 on the speed, and then 496 on the accuracy, which is most certainly overkill for Brutal, but I do also use them sometimes in the arena just to be able to strip off the buffs, because again, that AoE on the A2 has 4 chances or 2 chances to strip 4 buffs off, which can be absolutely massive. And then there's just the free shot to potentially land the Provoke if we get lucky on the first hit of either one of his AoEs. For the Blessing, this is more of the arena focus of Temporal Chains because he slows down the enemies when they buff, and so he has a chance to cut in and then strip off their buffs. But if he was fully optimized for just Hydra, I'd probably switch it over to Cruelty, but that is covered on the team for the next champion that we'll get into. Then for the Masteries, fairly standard debuff for Masteries. You guys get the drill, offense tree ending on War Master, support tree hugging the entirety of the right-hand side, ending on Sniper and Master Master Hexer. Next to him, we have Kantra the Cyclone, who is in Relentless and Divine Speed. So her total stats are as follows: 62,000 on the HP, 3,600 on the defense, 247 on the speed, and then 346 on the accuracy. So definitely good enough for Brutal. So for the blessing, as I just hinted at with Mighty Ukko, this champion is the one in Cruelty because she does have a triple hitter on the A2, and so that can very quickly stack up all the Cruelty stacks, and so we didn't really need it on Mighty Ukko in this particular iteration of the composition. However, if we do get the Molly Tankard, then I'll have to rethink how to ensure that we have Cruelty on this particular team. For the masteries, you guessed it, fairly standard debuffer masteries, but notably because she does have a triple hitter on the A3 and then a double hitter on the A1, so the average of her hits is fairly high, so Giant Slayer is the better option as far as the offense tree is concerned. But the support tree coming down, getting a lot of the debuffer side of the right hand side of the support tree, and ending on Sniper, Master Hexer, but notably coming down Cycle of Magic, just a small chance to get back to her AoE a little bit sooner, a little bit quicker for more damage and more debuffs. Next up, we have Wallmaster Othorion, fairly recent addition to the squad in, like I mentioned, double perception and 2-piece stone skin, which I basically use as a resistance set, but the added bonus of the amulet, which is supersonic, which is quite handy for getting the stats required for this champion, because he was very intense. So total stats on him, and I'm very proud of this build if you couldn't tell, but 52,000 or 53,000 almost on the HP, 3,300 on the attack, 2,300 on the defense, 238 on the speed, full crit rate, 222 on the crit damage, so nothing crazy, but we also had index high into resistance, 450, and then 244 on the accuracy, because we are taking credit for the fact that he provides himself with increased accuracy, so this is effectively closer to that 350-ish mark that we need for Nightmare. So yeah, building him was absolutely crazy. It took many hours of trying to figure out which pieces I could steal from the right people to make it work, and then definitely the benefit of getting the resistance ascension on the banner there, which is kind of an honorable mention. As we mentioned, for the Blessing Lightning Cage, because he is one of the Mischief tanks, that's why he is built in high resistance, because he's providing a lot of unique buffs for himself, so that he is most certainly the target most of the time, and Lightning Cage just is another buff to make the hit of Mischief target him instead. And then Masteries, you guessed it, fairly standard debuffer masteries, left-hand side of the offense tree, coming down onto War Master, right-hand side of the support tree, although we diverge in order to get Lasting Gifts and Master Hexer, and come through Cycle of Magic, as well as Lore of Steel. Next up, we have the Michinaki twins over here side by side. We'll start with the one for Nightmare, and he, as I mentioned, is in double perception and crit damage. His total stats are as followed: 48,000 on the HP, basically 4,900 on the defense, 243 on the speed, full crit rate 261 on the crit damage, and then 407 on the accuracy, which is enough to handle Nightmare and what it throws at us. He does have Brimstone. He is the primary Brimstone on that composition for Nightmare Clan Boss. And then for the Masteries, fairly standard debuffer masteries. Once again, left-hand side of the offense tree, coming down to War Master, support tree, debuffer stuff, Sniper, Master Hexer. You guys get the deal. For Michinaki 2, masteries are exactly the same. They're built and used in the exact same way, but notably we built him a lot differently, where we have the 4-piece Merciless set as well as the 2-piece Perception set. So he's indexed more into, I guess, effectively a reflex type set. At least that's what we're going for in this build. Total stats here, 57,000 on the HP, so a little bit tankier than Michinaki 1, but a lot lower defense, 4,200 as compared to, I think, 4,800, something like that. 246 on the speed, so around the same speed. Full crit rate 233 on the crit damage, a little bit less crit damage, and then 364 on the accuracy, less just because we need less for Brutal. And then for the masteries, because Brimstone is carried by Eostrid Dreamsong in this particular composition, we actually opted for Nature's Wrath, one of the newer blessings from the last Divinity, and then we're getting, extra damage for each debuff he places, which is a lot, with the Hex and the HP Burn and the decreased defense, decreased attack, etc. So lots of debuffs, so we just get a little bit more damage out of him. And then, like I mentioned, masteries are identical between the two. And actually, skipping ahead here, the masteries are going to be the same for Michinaki 3 as well. We just haven't finished farming those masteries just yet. Next up, we have Nekmo number 2, who's in a fresh Provoke set. It's not the best, but he is, the third champion to get the Provoke set, and so he kind of has the leftovers. And you can see his gear's not even maxed, so his stats aren't as high as they should be, but we're waiting for the appropriate artifact enhancement in order to be efficient as far as leveling up his gear. So mind the HP and defense being a little bit lower than they should be, but they are currently 47,000 on the HP and then 2,800 on the defense, 249 on the speed. Don't care about the damage, and then 314 on the accuracy, which is more than enough to handle a hard difficulty, which is what this one is built for. Just like his twin, we are also running cruelty for the same reason, stacking up the defense reduction ability there, and then the masteries are identical between the Nekmo Thars. Left-hand side of the offense tree, coming down to War Master, support tree splitting, arcane celerity, and rapid response, and then ending on sniper and master hexer. Next up, we have Uggo, who is stacked out in terms of epic empowerment. She's close. She might be one of the first +4s I have on my account in terms of epics. We'll just see if RNG will grant that to happen, but also 5-star awaken. You got lucky from Soulstones, but yeah, she is in relentless gear. No offset there, just broken pieces, just because she just didn't need it. We didn't need. We were stacked up on the stats, so we didn't need much more. But 85,000 on the HP, which is pretty substantial. 3,000 on the defense, so super tanky. 261 on the speed, which is great. Lots of crit damage, but that's just all of the bonuses being added up. She's not built for damage at all whatsoever. 464 on the accuracy, which is way overkill for brutal, but nonetheless, she's kind of useful in like some niche cases in the arena as well, where if we just want AoE block buffs. So kind of handy there. We have Miracle Heal on her because she does a decent amount of healing. She's taking a lot of extra turns, and then she can restore some of the destroyed max HP from the Head of Decay, particularly when the Head of Decay is gone. So we can increase the maximum capacity of her health pool when the head is not alive. For the masteries, you guessed it, standard debuffer masteries, left-hand side of the offense tree, coming down to War Master, right-hand side of the support tree, ending on Sniper and Master Hexer. Next up, we have Rector Wrath, one of my other lucky charms as far as getting a high tier of soul for her 6-star, which is really nice. Got that from, I think, an Immortal Soulstone during one of the boosted rates, but I digress. Reflex and speed, so she's cycling back to her heal as much as she possibly can. 64,000 on the HP, 3,200 on the defense, 277 on the speed, and then 559 on the resistance. She used to be one of the just kind of fit into arena as possible high resist reviver champions, but I've since got better ones. But nonetheless, I kind of kept her resistance around the same level just because mischief tanking, of course, but also just any content I throw into her, she's never going to take any debuffs. For the blessings, just like Uggo, we're running Miracle Heal for the same exact logic, healing, restoring the destroyed max HP. And then for the mastery is very different. Finally, someone who's not standard debuffer, because she doesn't obviously do much debuffing, although she has decreased stack on her A1, but I don't have enough accuracy on her for that to land. But we're indexing on her resistance with Unshakable just to index into that. Solidarity is also kind of an honorable mention just because of all the buffs she's providing, which gives everyone else a little bit extra resistance. Stuff to keep her alive, improve parry, mostly for the arena. But healing mastery is on the support tree, skipping over merciful aid because it's just not useful. But getting the Lore of Steel, then coming back over to lasting gifts, of course, to extend the veil, heals and whatnot, and then Spirit Haste because she is a reviver. Then we have Inquisitor Shamael, who I must say is in a fairly interesting build, but nonetheless I kind of like it. But 2-piece Stone Skin, which again is a resistance set for me. 2-piece Supersonic, which is a little bit of resistance and HP, and then the Cruel set for the extra attack. So his total stats are as follows: 44,000 on the HP, 4,200 on the attack, 2,100 on the defense, 237 on the speed, full crit rate, 224 on the crit damage. So nothing crazy, but you'll see that we're indexing high into resistance, so 432, because we don't want him taking a lot of debuffs on the team. He could mischief tank if he happens to be the target, and so just kind of building him to be capable of such things. So we sacrificed a little bit of damage to make sure we get that. We went for Heaven Cast because obviously on his A2 he basically will ignore all the defense just by having a couple of buffs on him, so getting a Crushing Rend doesn't really do anything, and so we just get more damage when he has buffs up, and which will synergize well with his ignoring the entirety of defense on the A2. And then for the masteries, he's kind of a mix of like PvP and PvE, but notably coming down to Giant Slayer because he does have the triple hitter on the A3, as well as whenever debuffs are taken by the team, he's always going to counterattack as many times as there are debuffs on the A1, and you can just get a bunch of Giant Slayer procs because of that counterattacking, even though it slows down your run horrendously. But nonetheless, might as well take advantage of it since he's going to do it anyways and get a little bit of free damage out there. But yeah, so a little mix of the left-hand side PvE style of offense tree, but also getting a little bit of the center parts where he hits a little bit harder. And then defense tree coming down notably to Retribution, extra chances to counterattack, just helps him get more turn meter and helps, again, another chance to apply Giant Slayer hits. And lastly, we're getting to the champions who are not fully built as far as the entirety of their kits and masteries and whatnot. But nonetheless, I do want to highlight them as well, just because this is the nature of being free to play. It takes a long time to find the spare time and or energy to work through Minotaur and put gear on people, etc. So it's just part of the realities of playing the game. So Michinaki number 3, also in Merciless, but also in a speed set. And again, the speed set is just so he can go faster than people on the team, just because when you're indexing a lot less into accuracy for the champions on this composition on the hard team, you can just get a lot more speed out of them, and it was just kind of hard to keep him quick as far as putting him in another Merciless set, because I don't have that many Merciless sets on my account. So digressing. Total stats here, 43,000 on the HP, 3,700 on the defense. So he's a lot less quality build than the other two Michinakis, but that's just the nature of him being on the lowest level of the team. 241 on the speed, full crit rate, 232 on the crit damage, and then 235 on the accuracy, which is kind of not enough on its own, but currently, like I said, a lot of these champions are in flux and they're not really fully optimized. He doesn't really have a good amulet. I'd like to have a double accuracy roll. We'll see what this does at level 16 eventually, but yeah, so that's where the remaining accuracy is kind of sitting. I would prefer to glyph one where it's a double roll for amulets. For the blessing, don't have one. We haven't gotten a third Michinaki soul, but I'd probably go with Brimstone if I had the choice. And then masteries, like I said, he's going to be the same as Michinaki 1 and 2, but currently unfinished. And then we have Varl the Destroyer, who's a very, very fun champion. At least seeing him in action. He's in lethal and perception there as the gear sets. So total stats here, 38,000 on the HP, so fairly squishy, definitely dies here and there, but that's why part of the reason why we have Rector Wrath on the team, but he does heal himself on the A1, which is pretty nice. 5.8k on the attack, so we can get that a lot higher with a little more optimization, but nonetheless, that's where he stands currently. 2k on the defense, 214 on the speed, 100% on the crit rate, 219 on the crit damage, and then 253 on the accuracy. So once again, nothing crazy, but he's not the highest priority for lethal gear on my attack. He kind of has the leftovers that are not used by more important champions, but you know, we make do with what you can. For the blessing, I did buy the 1-star from the shop, and we did go same thing as Michinaki 2 with the Nature's Wrath, because he is applying a handful of debuffs, and so we can just cap out the damage boost from that. Although if I start to stack up more buffs on the team, then maybe Heaven Cast might be the way to go, and then obviously Crushing Rend if you happen to get him all the way out to 6-star for the Ignore Defense. Masteries unfinished, as we mentioned before, but we're definitely going to try and end on Helm Smasher, focusing mostly on the offense tree, and then getting a little bit of the debuffer stuff, probably Sniper, Master Hexer on the support tree. Maybe not Sniper, I don't think we need that one, but definitely Master Hexer on the support tree. And then lastly, as a bonus, since I did mention that he's going to be swapped in, and he's currently in development, not even ascended, waiting for CVC, but we do have Archbishop Pinthroy in the Reflex set and Perception. I could show you the total stats, but they're relatively incomplete because he doesn't have an amulet or a banner on, but nonetheless, we can just go out for the sake of the example. 44,000 on the HP, it's going to be higher. 3,100 on the defense, that's also going to be higher. 220 on the speed, which is going to be higher once again, probably somewhere around 240 when you add the banner in. Resistance, 269, accuracy, 222. And again, these are going to be closer to about 350 and 250. Those are the targets I was aiming for with the build. So with the amulet and the banner, that's where he's going to end up. He is not currently ascended or booked for that matter, waiting for CVC, but I do have a 1-star soul for him just because I got lucky with that one, and I'll probably go, like I mentioned, with Lightning Cage just to make him the mischief tank as much as possible, because he's going to be built with resistance, and then masteries, as you would guess, undone. But we're probably going to go standard debuffer route, ending on War Master, and then focusing on the right hand side of the support tree as well. All right, so there you have it. There is a snapshot of my Hydra Teams currently 2024 edition, and we'll see if there's going to be follow-ups to this as an if I get improvement. I'll definitely want to show the full capability of the hard team once it's definitely a lot further optimized with more area bonuses, and then swapping some of the champions on that squad. So stay tuned for a follow-up on that one in particular. But for Nightmare and Brutal, unless we happen to get lucky with champions from the wish list, as far as the primary wish list and maybe even the secondary wish list, that's the only way we're really going to see a change to those teams. So that's not going to be changed much in the near term. But yeah, appreciate all of you who stuck through this long video to get all the way here to the the end, but also I appreciate the guys who may have skipped over to the end if you did want to watch all of the champion builds. Let me know in the comment section down below what your current capabilities are for Hydra in terms of the difficulty that you pursue, and let me know what your long-term goals are for Hydra Clan Boss. Do you want to be able to one key your first Nightmare team, or do you want to start being competitive in Hydra class? Let me know all of that in the comment section down below. As always, if you did enjoy the video, then be sure to hit that like button down below. It really does help out the channel. And if you enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to the channel for more content just like this one in the future. Thanks for watching and have a good one.